The summer breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open window of Grace Mitchell's modest apartment in downtown Boston. At 25, Grace was unlike many of her peers. She wasn't scrolling through dating apps or club hopping on weekends. Instead, she spent her evenings volunteering at the local animal shelter or nose-deep in business strategy books. "This is ridiculous, Pastor Williams." Grace paced her living room, her straight blonde hair swinging with each turn. "My father can't just arrange a marriage for me. We're in America in 2025. Pastor Williams, a longtime friend of the Mitchell family, sat uncomfortably on Grace's worn couch. "Your father's medical bills are astronomical, Grace. Blake Hudson's offer is generous." "Generous?" Grace's voice cracked. "He's buying me like some medieval bargaining chip." The news had hit her like a thunderbolt that morning. Her father, once a respected businessman, had fallen victim to a rare illness requiring experimental treatment. The insurance wouldn't cover it, and the bills had stacked up to over $3 million. Then, out of nowhere, Blake Hudson, the notoriously cold CEO of Hudson Technologies, had offered to pay everything with one condition: Grace would become his wife. "He needs a respectable wife for his image," Pastor Williams explained gently. "The board is pressuring him to settle down before they approve the European expansion." "So, I'm a business transaction," Grace muttered, staring out at the Boston skyline. "Why me? We've never even met." "Your reputation in the community is impeccable. Your charity work, your faith, my virtue," Grace finished, her cheeks flushing. She'd made no secret of her choice to wait for marriage, though she'd never imagined it would make her a target for an arranged marriage scenario. A sharp knock interrupted them. Grace opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccable suit. His steely blue eyes scanned her apartment with unconcealed judgment. "Miss Mitchell," he stated, rather than asked. "I'm Blake Hudson." Grace froze. The man's presence seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Chiseled jaw, perfectly styled dark hair, eyes that calculated rather than admired. He looked exactly like his magazine covers, but colder in person. "Mr. Hudson," Pastor Williams stood quickly, "we weren't expecting you today." "I prefer to handle important business personally," Blake replied, his gaze never leaving Grace. "Paperwork is ready. We marry this Saturday." Grace found her voice. "Excuse me? Don't I get any say in this?" "Your father already agreed," Blake said dismissively, placing a folder on her kitchen counter. "Everything is arranged. The prenuptial agreement states that after 2 years, you can choose to divorce with a generous settlement." 2 years of my life with a complete stranger? Grace's voice rose. "For money?" "For your father's life," Blake corrected, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps a hint of understanding, before the steel returned. "The choice is yours, Miss Mitchell. Your father's treatment begins Monday. I need your answer now." Grace felt trapped, torn between her own dreams and her father's survival. "Why me?" she whispered. Blake's expression remained impassive. "You're respected, educated, and—" his eyes briefly glanced away. "Uncomplicated by past relationships. Perfect for what I need." Grace stared at the contract, then at her father's smiling face in a photo on her bookshelf. With trembling fingers, she took the pen Blake offered. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "For my father." Blake nodded curtly. "My assistant will contact you tomorrow with details." He turned to leave, then paused. "And, Miss Mitchell, I expect absolute discretion about our arrangement." After he left, Grace collapsed onto her couch, the weight of her decision crushing her chest. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. Little did she know that Blake Hudson was asking himself the same question as his helicopter lifted off from the city, carrying him back to his empty mansion on the coast. The Hudson estate loomed on the Massachusetts coastline, like something from a period drama, all stone, glass, and precisely manicured gardens. Grace clutched her simple overnight bag as she approached the massive front doors, the wedding band, on her finger still feeling foreign. The ceremony had been brief. No flowers, no music, no guests except Pastor Williams and a stone-faced lawyer. Blake had spoken only the required words, his eyes fixed somewhere above Grace's head. When the time came to seal their vows with a kiss, he had simply touched his lips to her forehead, a gesture that felt more like a business transaction than anything remotely romantic. Mrs. Hudson, the housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, greeted her at the door. "Mr. Hudson has been called to an emergency board meeting. He asked me to show you to your quarters." "Of course he has," Grace muttered under her breath. Even on their wedding day, business came first. Her quarters turned out to be a suite larger than her entire apartment, decorated in tasteful blues and creams. A separate bedroom door stood adjacent to hers, Blake's room, she presumed. "Dinner is at 7, Mrs. Patel informed her. "Mr. Hudson rarely attends, but I've been instructed to set the table for 2 tonight." Left alone, Grace unpacked her meager belongings, feeling like an imposter in this palace of wealth. She changed into a simple blue dress for dinner, wondering how long it would take for the board members to realize this marriage was a sham. At precisely 7, Grace descended the grand staircase to find Blake waiting in the dining room, looking exactly as he had that morning, impeccable in a tailored suit, expression unreadable. "Your father's first treatment went well," he said by way of greeting. "The doctors are optimistic." Grace sat down stiffly across from him. "Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing for him." "It's a business arrangement, Grace. No need for gratitude." The meal progressed in uncomfortable silence until Grace couldn't take it anymore. "So, what exactly are the rules here? What am I allowed to do? Not do?" Blake raised an eyebrow. "You're my wife, not my prisoner." "A wife in name only," she reminded him. "What do you expect from me? Public appearances, charity galas, company events?" He ticked them off like items on a checklist. "You'll have access to the company card for appropriate attire. Otherwise, your time is your own. And," Grace hesitated, her cheeks flushing, "what about us?" "There is no us," Blake replied curtly. "That wasn't part of our arrangement." Something like relief, or was it disappointment, washed over Grace. "Good, because I'm not interested in being anyone's convenience." For the first time, Blake's expression showed genuine surprise. Most women would be thrilled to have unlimited access to my wealth without other obligations. "I'm not most women," Grace retorted. "I value things money can't buy." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "So I've gathered." The evening might have ended there, but fate had other plans. Just as dessert arrived, the mansion's ancient plumbing system chose that moment to rebel. A thunderous clang echoed through the walls, followed by a spray of water erupting from the ceiling directly above Blake's head. Grace couldn't help it. She laughed. The sight of the immaculate, controlled Blake Hudson dripping wet chocolate cake sliding down his expensive suit was too absurd. "Something amusing?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have to admit," Grace gasped between giggles. "It's a little funny." To her shock, Blake's stern expression cracked. A reluctant chuckle escaped him, growing into actual laughter as he wiped cake from his brow. "The mighty Blake Hudson, defeated by Victorian plumbing," he said, shaking his head. Grace grabbed napkins, helping him clean up. "You should laugh more often," she said without thinking. "It suits you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something genuine passed between them, a brief connection that neither had anticipated. Blake cleared his throat, stepping back. "I'll have someone fix the pipes tomorrow." As Grace headed to her room that night, she caught herself smiling at the memory of Blake's laughter. Maybe living with the Ice King wouldn't be completely unbearable after all. Meanwhile, in his study, Blake found himself staring at a photograph of Grace from a charity event, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Not in marrying her. That had been necessary, but in establishing rules that kept her at arm's length. 3 months into their arrangement, Grace found herself in uncharted territory. The sprawling mansion that had once felt like a gilded cage now had touches of her presence: wildflowers in simple vases, books scattered on side tables, and the occasional pair of ballet flats kicked off under furniture. "The board is thrilled with our marriage," Blake commented one evening as they shared a rare dinner together. "Our stock has risen 15% since the wedding. Glad to be of service." "To your bottom line," Grace replied with a wry smile. These dinners had somehow become more frequent, evolving from stiff formalities to something almost comfortable. Blake studied her across the table. "You've changed this place," he observed. "Is that a complaint?" Grace asked, tensing slightly. An observation. His voice softened. "It's less empty now." Grace had been busy. Beyond making the mansion more livable, she'd thrown herself into Hudson Technology's neglected charitable foundation, revitalizing programs for underprivileged youth. To her surprise, Blake had backed her initiatives without question, even attending a fundraiser where she'd caught him genuinely smiling with the children. That night, as a summer storm raged outside, Grace heard a knock on her bedroom door. "There's a leak in my ceiling," Blake explained when she opened it, looking unusually disheveled in a t-shirt and sweatpants. "The maintenance crew can't come until morning." The mighty Blake Hudson, defeated by rainwater this time. Grace teased, echoing his words from months ago. His mouth quirked into a half smile. "I'll sleep in one of the guest rooms." "Don't be ridiculous. This suite has 2 bedrooms, and one is perfectly dry," Grace said before she could overthink it. "The couch in there is larger than my old bed anyway." Later, unable to sleep with Blake just a wall away, Grace wandered to the kitchen for tea. She found him already there, staring out at the storm-tossed ocean. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "I never sleep well during storms. Not since I was a kid." "The great Blake Hudson, afraid of thunder?" she said gently, without mockery. "My parents died in a storm," he said quietly. "Car accident when I was 12. I was in the back seat." Grace's heart contracted. "I didn't know." "It's not in the corporate biography," he said with a bitter smile. "Orphaned at 12, raised by a series of boarding schools and distant relatives interested only in my trust fund." Understanding dawned on Grace. "That's why you're so cold, detached?" His eyes met hers. "Self-preservation." Grace moved closer. "Is that why you arranged this marriage? A safe option with no emotional risk?" "I needed a wife for business reasons," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "And of all the women in Boston, you chose the one least likely to fall for your wealth or charm," Grace challenged. "The one with principles that would keep her at arm's length." Blake's silence was answer enough. The thunder crashed, and Grace instinctively reached for his hand. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed, his fingers curling around hers. "What happens when our 2 years are up?" she whispered. "That depends," Blake replied, his voice rough. "On what?" "On whether this is still just a contract by then." His eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. The next morning, Grace woke to find a small velvet box beside her pillow. Inside was a beautiful engagement ring, not the ostentatious diamond he'd given her for show at their wedding, but a delicate band with a single sapphire the color of her eyes. A note read simply, "A proper proposal, if you want it." When she found Blake in his study, her heart racing, she placed the ring on his desk. "Ask me properly," she said. "Not as a business transaction." Blake Hudson, the man who commanded boardrooms with a glance, looked genuinely nervous as he stood and took her hands in his. "Grace Mitchell Hudson," he said, his voice catching. "These past months, you've brought light into a life I deliberately kept dark. Will you stay? Not for a contract, not for your father, but for us?" Grace's smile was radiant. "On one condition," she said. "Name it. We start over. A real marriage, in every sense." Blake's eyes darkened with understanding. "Are you sure?" Grace nodded. I was waiting for the right person. Turns out, I married him. As Blake pulled her close for their first real kiss, tender, passionate, and nothing like the sterile peck from their wedding, Grace realized some arranged endings become the most beautiful beginnings. 5 years later, Blake and Grace Hudson renewed their vows in the garden of the coastal mansion, surrounded by friends, family, and their 2-year-old daughter. Blake's once feared business reputation had transformed into that of a compassionate leader, while Grace's foundation work had changed countless lives. And if anyone noticed that their daughter shared a birthday exactly 9 months after a particularly memorable thunderstorm, well, that was just another chapter in their unlikely love story.